Memories of Living in America by Hakjin Kim. Almost 11 years have passed since my family moved in the current place. That's the longest time we've ever stayed in one home. Until then, we've moved at intervals of 2 or 3 years. There were several reasons: too big for 3 of us, too far from my husband's workplace and the university I went to live close to our friend, or because of my husband's transfer from Chicago to Seoul. Looking back then, there was one thing in common. I was tireless and enjoyed the tension I could feel in an unfamiliar circumstance. But now, after I settled in our current home, I no longer pack for moving. Instead, as time goes on, I feel nostalgia for the old days, and especially recall the past memories of living in the United States every now and then. We had lived 7 apartments in the United States for 9 years, all rented. Moving from one place to another in a foreign country was a challenging process. Even though I got accustomed to move since Buenos Aires, where I lived in 3 different places for 3 years, the whole thing about moving wasn't as simple as ABC. The first place we moved in was University Village, located in Athens, a university town in Georgia, as my husband had started his graduate school there 4 months before I joined him with Daewon, our 3-year-old son. He couldn't help finding a place for us instead of me. After being advised and led by a Korean student, Mr. Bak, who became a longtime friend, he unpacked his baggage next to the Bak's place. The 3-story building in which most residents rented were students of the University of Georgia, seemed to be about 3 decades old. The building was quite old enough. I could smell for mold when we entered the hallway. On the first day, while we were dragging our large bags to reach the 3rd floor by taking the stairs, we had to be escorted by a pack of cats that suddenly appeared out of nowhere around the building. They were walking together with us, shooting coquettish glances to make eye contact with us. At the door, the cats stopped altogether, waiting to be invited. I was nervous with them for fear of their stepping inside. We swiftly walked in the porch and shut the door behind them, and relieved. It was a very long day from Seoul via Chicago to Atlanta Airport, and finally, I stood in the apartment to settle down in a small town where wild cats were roaming in the street, being welcomed by my husband. Only my challenge to living abroad like in Buenos Aires began. Since my husband had never decided where to live or what to buy, I just let him go to work and did the rest on my own. A little while after being relieved, I could look around. Inside, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room. As the first dwelling place we would stay while waiting for a vacant apartment in the family housing of the university. This old apartment complex wasn't too bad to endure, except cats and mice. The cats I saw on the first day were catchers, in a manner of speaking. It seemed likely that cats were supposed to hang around to catch mice that frequently were everywhere in sight, even in the lower cabinet of the kitchen. Even though I made a fuss over the trace that a mouse left, such as a rat hole and a torn plastic bag of rice, and called the janitor to check the kitchen, asking him to do something to stop them, I soon got used to living with them that way. My son Daewon, who had been with his nanny or my mother until then, seemed to be satisfied with the new environment. In spite of being with me all day, long before he attended a preschool, he never looked tiresome. Rather, he was content with things around him and tried to do his best, whatever he was doing, to be a quick learner. Luckily, 3 months later, we had a phone call from the university that we could move to a family housing, the complex that was built for foreign students in the outskirts of the campus. It took 10 minutes by a shuttle bus from the campus to a family housing, and there came a school bus for children. As I loved my neighbors and the rural scenery, gradually, the small town began to grow on me. I made friends with the locals and people from around the world, including Koreans. Especially Daewon was lucky enough to meet his homeroom teacher in the kindergarten. It was so sweet of her that everybody cared for her. She always smiled when her eyes met anybody's. Her smile sweetened the class and encouraged my son, to be positive and active as well. When I finished my third quarter in graduate school, we had to move to Atlanta, Georgia because my husband began to practice law at a law firm. In Atlanta, we could afford to rent a better apartment in a quiet, decent neighborhood. Dewan started his first grade and I transferred to Georgia State University to continue for a master's degree in art history. He adjusted to a new school environment easily, and I met Ludmila, a Polish woman, in a meeting which was held for businesswomen working in Atlanta. I got along with her having lunch together at her apartment because she was a good cook. I loved her special dishes like lasagne. Atlanta, known as the setting of the movie Gone with the Wind, wasn't impressive to me. I just practiced driving by taking a highway to reach Georgia State University in downtown. Since then I could overcome my fear of entering the tollway, and I became a fast driver as I tried to reduce commuting time. And I handled driving entirely as a family driver. In summer 1990, we moved in a townhome in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. Soon after we settled down in that townhouse, I realized my decision on that area was wrong for me and my husband. It was too far to commute on a daily basis. It took almost 1 hour to get Chicago downtown. The best thing I could remember in that place was Teresa, my good neighbor, who was an immigrant from Poland, where she worked as a journalist, but then in Chicago as a full-time waitress. As she worked in the evening, we had been together chatting in the daytime once in a while, and she used to babysit Dewan for free. After experiencing heavy snow and Wheeling, we moved to Glenview, where we could save time to get downtown. Since most of residents in Glenview were Jewish people who mostly had a deep interest in education, I could feel at ease about the school my son would go to. To tell the truth, I felt sorry for Dewan, since we moved so often that he couldn't have intimate friends. Thankfully, he had positive attitude to what he faced and didn't cause any trouble in school, saying he went to school for learning. When my son attended Lyon Elementary School, I still remember a boy, John, who bullied my son. As I warned his mother that I could file a lawsuit about what he had done, and then regularly showed up in his class. Working as a volunteer, my son regained the impaired reputation. In 1993, when we went back to Chicago from Seoul, where we had lived for 2 years due to my husband's work, I had to get readmission to continue my graduate studies at the University of Illinois Chicago, and my son also transferred to Maple Junior High School. At this time in Chicago, I could be familiar with the suburbs and narrow down the area to find a condominium located next to a junior high school for my son. We should find a place within walking distance of his school, because I would be away too far in the daytime to pick him up at school. We were all content as long as my son could be safe walking home, even though I had to take my husband to railroad station to let him commute to work before I drove to my school by car almost 4 days a week. The apartment we moved in was in Northbrook County. In this district, I could see more Jewish families than in Glenview. That meant I could meet ardent parents and teachers in Dewan's junior high school and neighbors who would stick to the rules of the condominium complex. For example, when the kid bounced the basketball in the hallway, a neighbor who peeped and heard that noise reported right away to the management office to fine the kid $100 for breaking the rules. We loved to live in this neighborhood because we were law-abiding people. Dewan did well in school, getting excellent grades and winning math competition held in the state of Illinois. He seemed to enjoy his life in Northbrook, but I could feel he missed Korean school life that he had experienced for more than 1 year, and he often said he would like to get into a university in Korea, especially SNU, the nation's top university. That sounded ridiculous at first, because he had only 1.5-year education in Korea. But I decided to give him a chance to turn his dream into reality. For a trial of period. As long as he wanted it, there was no reason to think twice, and I set the time to leave Chicago to enroll Dewan at a junior high school in Seoul. As soon as I earned a master's degree, I put my idea into action. Before we left for Seoul, my job was to search for a place for my husband, who would stay alone apart from us because he still had to work. Since he worked downtown, I found one near Lake Michigan on Lakeshore Drive and signed a monthly lease for a studio apartment. Needless to say, my husband was content with it. When I was ready for a new start, two things came to mind. I was thinking that my ridiculous decision would be absurd in shaping my son's future, even though he had wanted it. Since he did well in school so that he could go to a good college and get a good job in America, going to Seoul to live his life was an adventure. In my case, living in Chicago was also a better choice, because I changed my major to graphic design to work as a designer in Chicago by running a studio. But I gave up a wish that I had for the sake of my son, and we flew to Seoul at last. Looking back, for 2.5 years in Chicago, the last period in the United States, we had lived well enough to keep good memories. Living in America for 9 years as a whole was good experience for Daewon. He learned how to survive this world by adapting himself to 5 different schools. Ultimately he made it. In other words, he entered ISNU. At some point in our lives we would ask whether we were on the right track. I believe I made a right decision for my son, who began adjusting to life in Seoul as a 9th grade student and got a good job enjoying social networking. After 20 years, I still remember everything I've experienced in America, such as universities I went to, apartments I lived, roads I went through, and people I met in school and in my neighborhoods.